Hello everyone. Hope you guys have been enjoying our videos here at FundRaiseo Academy. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've been with us a while, thank you for sticking around. Today we are doing a deep dive into something almost every founder eventually has to face, the investor pitch. Not the mechanics of which font to use or how many slides to make, but what actually makes an investor sit up, lean in, and start believing in you and your business. I've sat through hundreds of these as a founder pitching and as someone helping other founders build and refine their decks across climate tech, fintech, SaaS, e commerce, and B2B. And the pattern is always the same. It's never really about the slides, it's about whether the story holds together. So let's get into it. This session is called the Investor Ready Pitch, what every early stage founder must get right before raising capital. Here's the thing about pitching that took me a while to fully internalize. The deck is never really the product you're selling. You are. Investors aren't writing a check because your slides look polished. They're writing a check because by the end of the meeting, they believe you understand your business better than anyone else in the room and that you're the right person to build it. I remember working with a SaaS founder, a workflow automation tool for mid-market operations teams, who had a genuinely strong product, real paying customers, and still couldn't close a round. When we sat down and went through his deck, the problem wasn't the business. It was that every slide was trying to prove something different, and by the end, the investor had no idea what the one thing was that made this company worth betting on. Once we rebuilt the narrative around a single thesis, the same business, same numbers, same team started getting term sheets within 6 weeks. That's really what this session is about. Not reinventing your business, but learning to tell its story the way investors are actually trained to listen for. So let's break down what investor ready really means, piece by piece.
In this episode, here's what we're covering today. And I'd encourage you to actually treat this as a working session. Have a notebook open and think about your own deck as we go through each part. We'll start with why your pitch is really the first test of the race. Not a formality before the real conversation starts, but the thing investors are quietly evaluating you on from the first slide. Then we'll talk about knowing your investor audience, because a Series A VC, a seed fund, and your uncle writing an angel check are not listening for the same things, even though you might be tempted to hand them the exact same deck. From there, we'll get into the actual deck blueprint, the 12 slides that show up again and again in decks that raise. We'll build your investment hypothesis together, which is really the backbone that holds the whole story up. Then, two ideas I find founders rarely get taught explicitly: horizontal logic and vertical logic. How to test your storyline just by reading your headlines, and how to make sure every individual slide earns its place. We'll look at what investors are actually weighing most heading into 2026, because the bar has shifted. I'll walk you through the pitch framework, a 5-point check I run with founders before any pitch goes out the door. We'll go through the mistakes that kill deals, the avoidable ones I still see every week, and we'll close with how to rehearse it properly, because a great deck delivered badly still loses the room. Let's start with section 1, because I think it's the single most misunderstood idea in fundraising. Your pitch is not evidence of a finished product. Investors know your product isn't finished. Nobody expects it to be, especially at pre-seed or seed. What your pitch is actually evidence of is how clearly you think, how well you command your own business, and whether you respect the investor's time enough to have done the work of making your story simple. There's a reason storytelling comes up again and again when people talk about what makes a founder fundable. As the novelist Jane Smiley put it, narrative is how we make sense of the world. Narayana Murthy, co-founder of Infosys, called storytelling the new currency of business. And Peter Guber, who's written extensively on this, said narrative drives emotion, and emotion drives decision making. Investors are human beings making a decision under uncertainty, and humans decide through story first, then justify with numbers. I saw this play out clearly with a climate tech founder I worked with, building a carbon monitoring platform for industrial facilities. Technically, the product was excellent, genuinely hard engineering, strong IP, but his early pitches read like a technical white paper. Investors would nod politely and pass. The moment we rebuilt the pitch to open with the actual cost of unmonitored emissions to a factory owner, a very human, very urgent problem, before we ever mentioned the sensor technology, the same meeting started running long, because investors were now asking questions instead of just listening politely. That's the shift. Before a single number matters, your pitch has to make sense as a story a stranger can repeat to someone else in the room. If they can't retell it, they can't champion it internally, and most checks get written by someone who first has to convince their partners.